Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's forum. Please welcome the Student Planning Committee Chair for Sport and Society Week, Lucas Monroe.
Welcome to the first annual Sport and Society Week, co-sponsored by Penn Athletics and Penn's Office of Social Equity and Community. We're so pleased to have so much support and such a great audience for this event. Today is National Student Athlete Day, which marks the first of 3 days of panels. And we're so excited about the many fantastic speakers we have made up of alumni, staff, and current students. My name is Lucas Monroe, Chair of the Event Planning Committee. I'm a sophomore in the College of Arts and Science, studying political science and Africana studies, and a member of the men's basketball team. The planning committee and I have been working extremely hard over the past 8 weeks to make this event possible, and I couldn't be more proud of the work we've done to bring this event to you all this week. Now it's my pleasure to pass it over to Rena, a fellow student athlete on the planning committee and a member of women's golf. She will introduce the panel for tonight.
Hi, everyone. Firstly, I want to thank you all for being here. Today, our panel will be on sport and society. Today, we will be talking about the influence of sports on people in the world, including what they said to the everyday lives of both athletes and fans, as well as the platform they provide to individuals and teams looking to make a difference. Today, among our panelists, we have Anita DeFrantz. She is the Vice President of the International Olympic Committee. She is an Olympic bronze medalist of U.S. women's rowing, and she is the first African-American to be part of this committee. Next, we have Mr. Clemson Smith Muniz. He is the voice of Los Jets in Español, and he is also the former Penn Sprint football student athlete. We have Nathaniel. He is the associate head coach of Penn men's basketball, and he is a former Penn men's basketball student athlete. And finally, we have Kayla Padilla. He is the founder of Trenton Youth Wrestling, and he is a former Penn wrestling student athlete. And finally, this panel will be moderated by Ms. Nicole Malloy. She is the director of Penn Office of Social Equity and Community and the former Penn women's track and field student athlete.
Thank you so much, Rena. And thank you, Lucas. Thanks also to Piper and Raven, the other two students on our planning committee for the first ever Sport and Society Week at Penn. And it makes me tremendously proud as a Penn Athletics alum to see this event come together. And it's my honor to be with all of you tonight. So to Anita, Clemson, Nat, and Kanan, thank you so much for taking time out of your very busy schedules to be with us tonight safely and virtually as part of this discussion. So to set the tone, I'll quote Nelson Mandela, who once said, "Sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire. It has the power to unite people in a way that little else does." He said that in the year 2000. So this is a question for everybody. What is it about sports that give them this tremendous and unique power to draw us in, to move us emotionally, and to unite us both as fans and as athletes? So Kanan, let us start with you.
Nice. First, I just want to say thank you all for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation. So sports for me, I grew up in a family with 8 siblings, and we all did some of the same sports: wrestling, football, soccer, baseball, track. And it gave us an opportunity to come together and support each other and cheer for one another. So when you have 2 parents and 8 siblings on the sideline cheering for you, you feel motivated and excited and all those good emotions that you want in life. So for me, it just was a way to build relationships.
Thank you. What about you, Anita?
When and where I was born, I was born in Philadelphia, but my parents moved us back to Indiana. There was no sport for me. I grew up with 3 brothers, and I knew there was something wrong about that. So I joined marching band and choir, madrigals, and all sorts of musical things. But I knew there was something else about working as a team that I was missing. So it was not until I arrived at Connecticut College that I had the opportunity to take part in sport, which ultimately led me to the noble sport of rowing after basketball first, of course. And the thing about sport is you learn. you learn so much. You learn about one another, you learn about how other people react, and you learn about the crowds, as Kanan suggested, cheering you and what they want you to be able to do. It's about humanity. Sport is about humanity.
Beautifully stated. Clemson, what about you?
It's all that we've mentioned. It's a live performance. It's people trying their best under pressure. It's a microcosm of life, because in an event, in the course of a 2-3 hour game or competition, it's the joy of victory, the agony of defeat, sweat, blood, and tears. I mean, all the cliches. I'm bringing out all the cliches, but that is attraction to fans. You assuming that yes, our sports are clean. Their athletes are not cheating or they're not fixed. Yes, it's people don't know the outcome, and that's why we sit there and watch and enthralled and then go crazy when you see Gonzaga win on a 40-foot bank shot in overtime. It's and also what's part of sports is the effort, the stories for the athletes to get where they are. I mean, Anita has a story. Every athlete has a story, and some of them are inspiring, compelling, and you know, for all these reasons, we watch sports, we root for sports, and it creates an identity, whether it's the city you live in, whether it's a player you like best, but different, or whether you just like to bet. but sports, no, sports is universal. It's everybody in the world understands competition.
Nat, what about you?
Yeah, so for me, you know, kind of what Clemson just alluded to, you know, for me, sports was a chance for a really shy kid to begin to, you know, find myself and have a little bit of an identity, particularly basketball. And I think one of the greatest things about sports is that, and this certainly happened for me, is it exposes you to so many different types of people. And you know, through that I was, you know, able to learn, you know, just the perspectives of other people, to have empathy for other people's, you know, station in life and what have you. And the other thing I think is that, you know, sports just teaches you so many lessons. I remember when I first had to get a real job after college and just reflecting upon the things that I kind of took for granted that I had learned through being a part of a team that other people didn't necessarily know. And you know, I think those are all the things that, to echo what the three others have said, but you know, hard work and teamwork and being part of something bigger than yourself and all those things, you know, I think that doesn't necessarily happen for everybody if they're not involved in sports.
That's true. And there's nothing like it. There's nothing like it. So most of us, if not all of us, got some exposure to sports as kids, whether participating or at least seeing other kids doing things that maybe we were interested in doing. Personally, my elementary school had something called field day. I don't know if this is a thing everywhere, but a couple of you are nodding. Yes. And I mean, this is, you know, little miniature Nicole elementary school version. And everyone did everything. So everyone did the Frisbee throw, everyone did the standing broad jump. And that was when I encountered this very bizarre practice where you hurl yourself backwards over a bar and land on a big soft mat called the high jump. I'd never seen it before. I'd never done anything like it, but I loved it. And I was like, this is great. And I had a knack for it. So sure, fine, whatever. Did that a couple of years at field day. Then I moved. And just in time for middle school, challenging time to move, but they had a track and field team at the middle school. And I said, hey, is high jump one of the things on that team or not? Because I remembered that from elementary school, that particular event. Had I not been exposed to it then, who knows if it's something that would ever have crossed my mind to try. But that exposure literally changed the trajectory of my life and my college career. I was a walk-on to track and field, but varsity athletics were a huge part of my life as a college student at Penn. And certainly we could all talk about things that we learned from our sports, which we'll get to towards the end. But that exposure is what I want to talk about next. So Kanan, let's go back over to you as the founder of a youth sports organization. Speaking of the athlete impact, which is the whole theme of our entire week of events. Why is it so important to make sure that kids have access to high quality coaching and mentorship and sports in their local communities?
Oh, it's so important. for me, if I didn't have the coaches that I had that had such a huge impact on me personally, athletically, emotionally, mentally, I wouldn't be where I am today. So I grew up in Trenton, New Jersey. It's about 45 minutes from UPenn. We didn't have youth wrestling available in the town that I grew up in. So getting to have this experience, getting to come to such an amazing university here at Penn, I was really, really ecstatic about the opportunity to give that opportunity to future student athletes. So we worked together actually with some Penn alum. The Mata brothers, for example, they were wrestlers here at Penn before my time, and my coaches helped Beat the Streets Philadelphia, which was founded by Penn wrestlers. We all just brought our knowledge together and our resources together and just really focused in on doing the best that we could to pass the baton, give someone after us the same opportunities that we had.
Thank you for the pass the baton reference on behalf of track and field. And as a side note, since this is an ongoing initiative for you, I want to give you a shout out. Kanan is, as we speak, pursuing a PhD in education at George Mason with 2 concentrations, because one is not enough. One is in educational psychology and the other is in research methods in sports psychology. So of all the things that are going to make you an even better coach and mentor, hurrah for that. I was not going to let that go unnoted during this session. But speaking of the importance of coaching, Coach Nat, you had to know you were going to be next. So without mentors and coaches, where would any of us be, right? Any of us in our sports pursuit. And so as someone who transitioned from being a stellar NCAA Division I collegiate basketball player to being a coach, what did you learn about the significance of the role of coach? And secondly, do you owe any of your former coaches an apology?
I owe all of them an apology. And I was not, I was on the team with some stellar NCAA players, but I was not necessarily one. But I'm glad you asked about coaching. I mean, I think Lucas is a perfect example. I'm sure my attitude about this will change once we start playing games. But I've said this before that I couldn't be more proud of what Lucas and some of our other guys are doing away from the court as much as I could be for what they will do on the court. And I think we have a chance to be really, really good and all those things. And that obviously is part of why I got into coaching. But it's the chance. I mean, it's not even what, I think that we impart into players and as they go from, 18-year-old young men, boys to more fully men who hopefully become, future great husbands and great fathers and great citizens and engaged people and everything. But, I think, at a place like Penn, we are lucky to be around guys. I mean, I think these are guys that I would go hang out with and hopefully will at some point. But, they are inspiring to us and they teach us as well, which is so fulfilling. I think for I'm sure I speak for all the coaches at Penn. It's to be around these level of not just athletes, but these level of people is very fulfilling.
I'm sure it is a mutual admiration society of sorts, which is one of my favorite things about sports. So given that we're thinking about, again, the impact of athletes, they have to start somewhere, which is often at the local community level. You have to have good coaching, which is where wonderful people like Nat come in. But then you have to be exposed to the sports, and not everyone can go in person, right? So that's where broadcasting comes in. So let's jump to Clemson. So you have been a pioneer in expanding access to Spanish-speaking audiences. And side note, congratulations on 21 years as the voice of, is it Los Jets in Español? That's the one that's 21. So congratulations on that. That's incredible.
21 years without a Super Bowl.
Well, that's why you have to stick around. But as we think about it's hard to imagine life without that coverage, right? Particularly given that even if you could go to all the games you wanted to in your area, you wouldn't be able to go to the ones that are outside of your region. You wouldn't be able to go to international games. So without the role of the sports media, many of us would never even experience some of our favorite sports moments. So what is it about broadcasting that you find to be the most rewarding, since you're particularly during a pandemic when so many activities are limited?
Yes, it's been quite a challenge, except people discovering that I can broadcast from my loft at home. just like we're doing a Zoom meeting. But last year when the NBA had the restart and the bubble in Orlando, I ended up doing some games in the restart and playoffs. And I was sitting here where I'm now in New York. My partner was in LA, and the producer sometimes would be in Brussels, Belgium. And we were calling a live basketball game off the cloud. And to your point, Nicole, it's fandom can be defined by many different ways, and it has changed, it has evolved with today's age with social media, and fandom for the younger people is quite different than it was for me and Anita growing up, where we usually identify. Well, growing up in Puerto Rico, I looked for the Puerto Rican players in the major leagues, and Roberto Clemente and the Pittsburgh Pirates were an early favorite. But my father was in Philadelphia, so I rooted for Willie Montañez, and then Mike Schmidt played in Puerto Rico, and Jay Johnston and Greg Luzinski and Larry Boa. So yes, I became a Phillies fan, and that was fandom by seeing people up close and having a local connection. But today's broadcasting, my world has changed. It's not just local. We stream. That's the future of this. That's why it's preferable to be on site, to be in the stadium. And I was there during football season in 2020. I was there, but nobody else. We were broadcasting in an empty stadium. And I will say this about the athletes, basketball, baseball, and football. They played hard. It reminded me, we play sports for competition, for fun, and it reminded me of playing in our backyard or playing in the playground. You still play hard. And I saw that last year during the pandemic. No crowds, empty stadiums, but you saw a high level of play in all these sports because they cared and they wanted to do the best, which is another attraction of sports. But going back to your question, yes, now people can live in Argentina, can live in Mexico City, but root for an athlete in New York, root for an athlete in LA. And this is how our world has changed now. They have access, and you may not have the TV rights, but you can listen to the broadcast, on radio, on streaming, and there's where I come in. Now, when I do social media, I'm not just thinking of New York City or the East Coast, I'm thinking worldwide.
Beautiful. And one of the worldwide sports events that people look forward to for years in terms of broadcast would be the Olympics. And am I the only one who now has the Olympic theme song in my head? I'm wondering if just the word Olympics makes you think of that. But I have such fond memories of growing up watching the Olympics, and I look forward to it every single time. So Anita, over to you. As someone who has competed at the highest level of international sports, as captain of the Olympic bronze medal winning US women's rowing team, hats off for that. I'm sure that the Olympics, I would imagine, are part of your warmest memories of competition. But as you've moved from being perhaps a fan and spectator of the Olympics through to being a competitor and medalist, through to being a member of the organizing body, how has your perception of the significance of the Olympic Games changed over time?
My first experience at the Games was living in the Olympic Village, which is a place like none other in the world. Everyone there has been successful. They've been selected by their country to come and represent them at the Olympic Games. And living in that village was such a wonderful experience. It causes me to say, if we could do it for 4 weeks, we should be able to do it forever. And that is my goal. Living with respect. I call the Games a celebration of excellence in which everyone lives with mutual respect and fair play. And that is just an incredible thing. We now have 206 national Olympic committees, 206. That's far more than membership in the UN for a number of reasons I won't bore you with right now. And the athletes from all those nations work hard, and they know that they have to be the very best in this tiny little moment of time. And if not, it's 4 years until the next opportunity. But that really affected me. It made me truly believe that we could, even in this great nation, finally get to mutual respect and fair play. We're not quite there yet, but I think we know what we have to do for certain, and we just have to do it. If I could go back to 1984 and those games, which is what ripped me from the East Coast to where I will be for the rest of my life here in Southern California, after those games, there was something created eventually called the LA84 Foundation. And I was so happy after 1 year of coaching at Princeton when I realized I had no idea what I was doing. And I told the young ladies to jump off a cliff and make them faster, they would do it. And it scared me how much power a coach has, especially with no knowledge about coaching. So we created a coaching program that has, well, by the time I left, had taught over 700,000 people how to coach. And the volunteers will coach. Communities want their kids to have the best of all. So we went to the communities that had the least and began creating sports clubs there so that they could have the same kind of feeling about their kids and have an opportunity to cheer for them. And, you know, it's created over time 2 or 3 generations of young people who've gone into sports as their jobs, their life jobs, especially in swimming, because if you can swim, then you can row. And the world will be better when we have more rowers.
No bias whatsoever in that statement, I'm sure.
None.
Don't leave out the cyclists.
Cyclists, they're okay, but you know, they don't deal with water and elements the same way we do.
Oh, I've done a century.
Clemson, just remember, this is a peaceful, mutual respect moment. Yes, we don't want to do sports wars just because Clemson's a cyclist. But I will actually, I'd like to stick with you, Anita, for a moment, because you've been such a passionate advocate for girls and women in sports. My understanding is that you are credited with getting women's softball and women's soccer accepted into the Olympics. And I will say, from my own personal experience, both sports and academics hold a very special place in my heart because they're the rare arenas where girls can be appreciated and judged based on their accomplishments as opposed to their appearance. And I feel that that is really, really important. And sometimes it's the first and only time where a girl has that experience. And so I personally think that that's one of the most freeing things about sports. I know that if I high jump, the only thing that matters is whether the bar is still up. Nobody cares if I'm wearing lipstick. No one cares how I look in the uniform. Is the bar up or not? Nothing else matters. And that is something every girl should experience, in my opinion. So why don't you share a little bit with us about why it's so important for you to be such a fierce advocate for this?
Well, if we don't do this, we're leaving out half the world, and that doesn't make sense. If we want sports to grow, we need to go with folks who can help it grow. It was fun being a member of the International Olympic Committee in my early days, because it's like, didn't you say you wanted to welcome all the youth of the world to the next games? You didn't say just the boys, you said all. And therefore, we had to start doing that. So I'm very proud, if I may just tout my own record. We started in the first, from 1900 to 1984. There were about, maybe 12,000 women who competed in the games. From 88 to now, there have been more than, let's see, get the number right, more than 35,000 women who competed at the games. So now we have certainly enough who can give back to sport and become coaches and become administrators and so forth. And that's what we need to make sure all the boys and girls in the world will have access to sport. And the Olympic movement itself became screaming and dragging into the 20th and now to the 21st century, I'm proud to say. And in Tokyo, it will be very close to 50-50 on the field of play. We had baseball has too many athletes, and they only did 6 baseball teams and 6 softball teams, but softball teams are half the size of baseball teams. So anyway, that's something we will get right for Paris and also for the Olympic Winter Games in Beijing. It's about doing the right thing in order to have sport grow. We cannot have ignored half of the world and expect sport to grow.
Nicole, may I add to that?
Please.
And Anita mentioned, you know, what that does for all the women who are able to compete and those that become coaches as well. But as a father of a daughter who likely will never compete in the Olympics, but who loves soccer, I think the other thing that it does is provides, you know, those role models for all those girls in whatever sport it is, to do the things that you said. They don't have to, it's not about the lipstick you wear, or you mentioned earlier, the uncomfortable shoes and all those things. It's about, the competition and all the things we alluded to earlier about that you learn from sports and all of that stuff. And I think that the biggest thing with all those things, and I think this is one of the things why sports is so great, is we all benefit when more people are included in whatever walk of life it is. And I say that knowing as a white man, we're the ones who have benefited from the exclusion too often. The other thing is, I think all of us as Americans should be thankful that the women's soccer team got included, because they win and they give us people like Megan Rapinoe, and my daughter rocks the jerseys and Morgan jersey all the time and everything. And so, I mean, I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to Anita for that.
Hats off.
There was a team effort.
A team
You're the
effort,
only one here.
A team effort, and you played a pivotal role in paving this way. So we are all grateful. Thank you for that, Nat. So speaking of using one's position and using one's platform to make an impact for other people, let's talk a little bit about athletes and teams taking a stand and what that means. And we've got two examples with Georgia. Let's start there. Just this past year, the Atlanta Dream of the WNBA used their influence leading up to the election for the Senate seat because they took a stand for Black Lives Matter. And just within the last few days, the Major League Baseball has withdrawn the All-Star game from Georgia because of outrage over voter suppression. So let's think a little bit about the continuation of Mandela's quote, because I gave the first part of it, but he went on to say in the same speech, quotes about sports, quote, "It is more powerful than governments in breaking down racial barriers. It laughs in the face of all types of discrimination." And this is Nelson Mandela coming out of a long entrenched system of apartheid, speaking about sports with this kind of reverence. So when we think about sports and athletes and teams, what is it about the athletic platform that draws people's attention when they take a stand as opposed to when someone else in society takes a stand? Why does that resonate? This can be anybody who wants to jump in.
I think it's the risk taking. It's the fact that they're going to step out of their team or their niche as being a favorite athlete and say, no, this has got to stop. I'm not going to be a part of this. And if you really believe in me, listen to what I'm saying about how bad this is and how unacceptable it is.
Yeah, and I think from a psychology perspective, we learn so much about conformity and how people do things that people around them do. So as athletes, sometimes we're put up on a space where people get to see us more. So using that platform when you're being viewed so much and your voice is being listened to so often, I think it's a great space for us to say, okay, here are some things that are right, and here are some things that aren't, and here's how we would want to see things go.
Nicole, I when I was young and playing basketball, basketball led me to be in spaces where I was often the only white guy, and I think, through that, I certainly learned a lot of things, and I think, I am so grateful for those opportunities and that and learning that and getting through whatever discomfort most people have when they're when they're the minority and all those things. But the other thing that happened is, we all had our lives get paused with a pandemic, and then we had some extremely traumatic incidents, which weren't the first, but it was the first while our lives were on pause, and the world reacted in a way that it hasn't necessarily. And I think, personally, I think we had, this is an opportunity for us to reckon with racism and the history of race that in this country. But if the gaps that in housing and education and generational wealth and healthcare and all those things, if they don't get changed, then that chance is squandered. And I think that the pandemic has shown a light on so many of the disparities in our society. And it's not just the racial disparities. It's like Anita alluded to, the gender disparities. It's the LGBTQ community. It's Latin communities. And I think one of the greatest things is that in all of this, during this time, our young people stood up, our athletes stood up, both professional and our student athletes and our student athletes here at Penn, have stood up. I mean, we have a number of examples, but I watched the first panel that you guys ever put on. And I mean, there's some big time people, but the most big time of all of them is Kayla Padilla. And she started the Sideline Post, where she gives a voice to student athletes. And I think that the courage of the student athletes in particular, all the athletes, but this, for me who works at a college, the student athletes, the courage and all the things they do gives me hope for the future across all those lines. And as you said with the Mandela quote, sports has an unparalleled ability to provide those platforms and that potential. Like, I would never have, there's no JJ Reddick's, Kyle Korvers, and Nat Grahams who think the way we think if it wasn't for basketball. And sports has the power to do that, and like nothing else, in my opinion.
Beautifully stated. Clemson.
I think one reason it starts frequently in sports is because in sports is where many people for the first time learn about sacrifice, about teamwork, about relationships. And you do it in a multi-ethnic, multiracial, multi-ethnic background. And if you don't work together, chances are you won't succeed. And also, a lot of athletes use sports to improve their lives. So they know about growing up without basic needs, or lacking, or having to work, or the parents having to work extra hard to support a family and ensure the education or the better future of the kids. And it's not always, but I think that's one reason why you see athletes more willing to speak their mind on a number of issues. And you do it because you have a platform. You gain a platform because you've been good at the sport. Now I think it's a complicated matter. It's not every athlete has the courage to take a stance on issues. Not every athlete is worthy of following. I'm with Charles Barkley. Athletes shouldn't be role models, shouldn't be considered role models, but yes, some athletes are worthy of imitating. And even those who speak out don't always carry the winning hand at the time. It takes changes in society, and Anita knows this in Olympic Games. They happen slowly. You have to keep pushing. You have to keep voicing, demanding, fighting, protesting, but yes, because of these things, sports is a platform that can reach many people. The challenge now, and with all this, is that I think the athletes have a voice. They're using that voice, but they don't control the game. The owners are the wild card in all this. And you saw when Major League Baseball took the All-Star game out of Atlanta, the Atlanta Braves were pissed off and wrote a interesting statement to the distraction. But for me, this is an evolving issue. But I think sports is like Mandela thought, like Muhammad Ali thought, like Roberto Clemente thought. Sports is a place where you can start showing that change is possible. Where you start voicing those demands, insisting, and evolution and transformation.
Yes, and a lot of what all of you have said relates to the athletes themselves and what athletes can learn and what athletes can contribute. would you each talk a little bit about what spectators and what fans can learn from the athletes that they're watching, whether it's watching them in competition or watching them take a stand on a social issue?
Okay. All right, I'll go first. Spectators learn a great deal from how athletes comport themselves. They learn that although most spectators have no idea how much work an athlete does to get to the place where they're on television, say, and are a professional athlete, it's an enormous amount of work, and nobody really understands that except the athletes who go through it. And you probably don't want to talk about how much hard work you've had to do. I look at the sign of the cholesterol behind that, and I think of the place where we pump so much iron all the time in order to get strong enough to be rowers. But it's about how they perform under stress, and that is, it's what helps people become enthralled, and it creates I'm forgetting the word now, I'm sorry about that, but it's something that inspirational to see people do extraordinary things. Those moments of excellence, like that 3-point shot, sadly against UCLA, I'm in LA, was amazing. I mean, but it was effortless. He knew, as soon as the ball left his fingers, he knew it was good. And that's a moment of excellence that many of us will remember for a very long time until the next one comes along. And that's what sports provides the spectators, increasing moments of excellence to celebrate and talk about and to utilize for themselves over time.
And to come together and celebrate. That's something that a lot of people can mention to a total stranger. Hey, did you see that? And then they immediately have a way to connect with one another. Who else would like to comment on what sports bring to the fans?
I think that the other thing is, I think, when I was a kid, as Clemson alluded to, there was Charles Barkley saying, "I'm not a role model," and there was athletes that didn't want to get involved in activism or politics or whatever, and so much of that has changed. There's also things like Kayla Padilla's sideline post and the Players Tribune and those things that allow for a voice from the players that we didn't necessarily hear all those years back when I was a kid. And so now I think the fan gets a chance not to only be inspired and look at them as just as if they're almost superheroes, but they also get to see the humanity of the athletes and realize that they're people too, and flawed and have opinions, and they can be, as Clemson said, they can be right, they can be wrong, they can be, in moments they can be good and bad, and they, at one moment they can be good and one moment they can be bad. And I think it's important, again, for like my daughter and my two sons, and to be able to not only see that these are, superheroes of physical abilities, but that they have intellect and they have, opinions and care about things and, want to change things. And, that those are the things more so than the sports that I hope they get out, or the physical attributes that I hope my kids and the kids on our team get out of sports, really, in the long run, is all of that stuff.
Sports provides us gratification, pleasure, joy, and I think it goes back to my original statement: is watching athletes perform at the highest level. It's no different than going to Broadway and watching an actor, actress, going to ballet. In fact, and the difference is that sports is live and improvised. And like one Baryshnikov quote that stuck in my head all these years, he was talking about basketball. And he said, yes, we ballet dancers can leap like anybody else, but we practice it. Basketball players don't. And which is why he admired Dr. J, because he did things that Baryshnikov wouldn't imagine without first practicing 100 times and performing live. And So that's the attraction for us to sports. But I think also fandom is evolving, and it has to do with social media. It has to do with the fantasy leagues. It has to do with betting. And it has impacted my profession because I debate constantly how much of analytics do I throw in. Do I talk about fantasy points? Because I know a lot of my people, well, I have a broadcast crew. I have engineers, statman, producer. They, 15 minutes before we go on air, they're trying to figure out their fantasy team for the weekend. And I got to turn around and say, stop it. Let's focus on the game. And, so in some sense, some fandom players are reduced to something tangible because it's going to earn me something. And that changes the experience.
I could add to that, one of the problems I've said for women's sports is that there's no betting. And there's no betting because there's not enough information so that people could place a bet. Betting actually started in Philadelphia with the horses, and that the horse sheet was the first betting sheet in sport that was available to more than a small group of folks. And I think that was Mr. Annenberg, if I'm not mistaken, who began that. And sadly, I'm not wild about betting. Let me express my concern about it, but until there's enough information about women's sports, there won't be betting, and there won't be the kind of necessity for sports pages to write about what's happening on the women's teams. And that's for me, a sad understanding of society. And that's just my thought.
Well, that's what you're here for. And plus, and I think I don't think I'm the only one who just learned something new about about betting. So and how it began. Kanan, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah. So I think what fans can get from sports is the mental component. So even though you can't be there physically, you kind of be there mentally in a sense. And from a sports like perspective, you can learn so much just by athletes' mentality. So if they could learn to replicate some of that in their personal life, in their professional life. So one of the principles here at Penn Wrestling is struggle well. And what that means to them or to a wrestler is when you're hitting adversity in a match, really push through it when you're training, try and struggle effectively and efficiently. And like right now as a society and a country, we're going through a lot. And it doesn't say that a struggle isn't difficult or, it's not always ideal, but there are times where you can struggle well and where you can really make gains from the difficulty. So I think just finding different ways to look at the mentality of a really high level athlete, an Olympic level athlete, how can a fan build that mentality and use it in their own life is something I think they could think about when they're watching sports.
Kanan, is that what us old fogies say? No pain, no gain?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. I mean, but you think about it, right? Like an athlete is trained to like find the most difficult situation in your training. You're trying to seek that out. And individuals in life, we oftentimes try and avoid what's difficult. But if you go into it like, man, when I find this challenge, I'm going to struggle well, it changes your approach, right? So I think athletes can take the mentality of the very best sports-wise, and you can use it. Even though you're not there physically, you can be in that situation mentally and develop that mindset.
And that's a perfect segue into what is something that you've learned specifically from your sport, right? Not just generally speaking, being an athlete, but from your sport in particular. For example, the high jump. I was watching, I think it was the Olympics one year, and they were interviewing the winner of the high jump and from the men's side. And he had said, what's always interesting about the high jump is that it always ends in failure. And it's funny, even as someone who'd done it for years, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it's true. You keep going until you miss 3 times, and then it ends. It doesn't just end when like victory, yay, no. You then keep going, unless you're a punk, right? Like, well, let's see if I can go higher. So if you really, want to challenge yourself, you keep going until you fail 3 times, and that's how your event always ends. And one thing that taught me is that you always want to strive to improve, but you don't ever want to stop trying to improve. You don't ever want to assume that you're done. There's always more to go. There's always higher heights to which to aspire. So what can each of you say about your specific sport and how wonderful it is and what you learned from it?
Well, I guess my picture has the green mark around or yellow marks. I'll go.
You're the bronze medal winner, Anita. I mean, we have to
Yeah,
bow to you.
last millennium. Let's not forget that there have been many since. So for me, it was recognizing that I could struggle well, that I could learn the skills of the sport, and I could make my way to being someone who was respected in the sport. And it's a sport where, we're environmentalists. We put the water exactly back where we found it each stroke. We do no harm, and we do no harm to one another. The only challenge for any rower is one's ego, which can be burnt sometimes. But it's, again, the feeling of being successful at something. We wanted the gold, and if you look at us on the podium, we're not amused that the gold medal went to the Easties, a country that no longer exists, that was doped to the gills, or to the Soviets, another country that no longer exists, that also had that issue of doping. But we did our best, and no one can ever take that away from us. So the idea of being with a group who had a common goal, we didn't really like each other that much. We didn't know each other. We fought to be in the boat for a month, and then we were in the boat, and then 3 days later we started racing. But we knew that we had this common goal. So being able to work with people who don't necessarily look like you or have the same life goals, but for that moment in time have the same goal of being successful is just a remarkable thing. And I use that all the time in my life since then.
So I can go. I mean, that's hard to follow, but right along the same lines of, you start to talk a little bit about humility. And I think that was one of the main things I got from wrestling. Is you and one other person, they're the same age, they're the same size. There's no advantage other than maybe trained a little harder or put a little bit more into it. So to go out there and have it not always go your way, we start and end every wrestling match by shaking hands. And, with this person that maybe stole your biggest dream in your life from you, they did it really fairly, being the same size, weight, without anyone else in the circle. So I think the humility of almost like having to submit my ego to another guy just one-on-one was a learning experience for me. And then the emotional regulation, it's a hand-to-hand combat, but you can't strike the person in a wrestling match. So you're learning, with the emotions boil through the roof, how can I control myself? How can I remain calm? Because even if I feel emotionally hurt or physically hurt, thinking about that isn't going to help you, right? If you're down a point, you have to focus, channel all that energy towards controlling your aggression.
I love the idea of humility and also the struggle well. I actually wrote those down. Or struggle well wrote down. Going to use that with the team.
Nice.
And I think what Nicole, what you alluded to, and Anita as well, like, I think that is a big thing that we all learn from sports is that adversity and dealing with that. Take Professor Duckworth's word, grit, learning the resilience and the perseverance and all of that to deal with the things that life throws in front of you, and learning that through sport, and then taking that to the real world is such a big part of what you get out of athletics. And I think your example is so good, and Anita's as well, that your sport, you end with the failure of not making a jump, or Anita's saying, if you can call that failure, I don't think you can, of being a bronze medalist when 2 other teams that doped beat you. But most people are not going to end everything with the ultimate success, whether it's athletics or any avenue of life. And I think learning that and learning to deal with that and learning what can be taken from that and learn from that is such a huge and valuable lesson.
Nicole, every time you talk about high jumping, I keep waiting for you to drop the phrase Fosbury flop.
That's, there was a great Olympics, a credit card that I won't name. I'm not going to advertise for them, but I believe they were all narrated by Morgan Freeman, and one of those was about Dick Fosbury revolutionizing the sport by changing the way it was done. So yes, it's always somewhere in the back of my mind. But
Nicole, just to butt in real quick, I don't want to be long, Clemson. I must say that my father was a high jumper. So I kind of know some of the terms, but he did. I believe he was, he's a little bit older. He did. What's that?
Was he a scissor kicker?
Or the Western roll or whatever.
Okay.
And I think he landed in like sawdust. Like there was no pad. That's tough.
Yeah, I'm glad I came along when I did. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, that's crazy. I just give a shout out. My dad's listening, so you give him a shout out.
Hi, Nat's dad. Shout out to the high jumpers. Clemson, other than recognizing the genius of the Fosbury flop, anything to add based on what you learned from playing football?
Well, playing football, basketball was my favorite sport. Football was the one I played at college level. But I'm going to draw from cycling, which I picked up in the early 80s when I busted my knee for the first time. I had 4 knee surgeries and an ACL repair in the early 80s before it was in vogue, general population. And then cycling, and also my partner is a former cycling pro, a sprinter, who still can beat the men at the finish line here in the Hudson Valley. And the thing about cycling, you learn about suffering because it's a sport of effort and recovery, and it's also about commitment. There's a time where you have to, do I bridge that gap? Do I chase that person down? Do I go now in my final sprint? It's you have to commit, and you have to honor that commitment. And no, and even the good sprinters don't always win the race. But I mean, I have to train with these middle-aged women who still race competitively and have been on the platform, have been on the podium at the Masters Championship. Some of them are national champions, and I get my ass kicked. But you learn about the effort necessary in life to persevere. And this leads me to a John Wooden quote that Bill Walton resurrected here this past week for the Final Four, which has to do with the best way to deal with success is knowing that at the end of the day, you did your best. It's not about winning every time, but it's at the end of the day knowing you did your best.
Very well put. And so as we start to wrap up, last question, what's a specific time when you recall seeing sports bring people together? So I feel like that's what we need to be thinking about right now. We could all use moments of being brought together.
For me, there's so many. For example, inside the Olympic Village, which is the home of the athletes, in the dining room, certainly in 1996, and I'll just stay there. The teams from North and South Korea had meals every day together.
Wow.
And that's kind of beyond. And it was risky, and yet they did it because it was a safe space for them to do that. And there's so many examples of similarities where people who had otherwise been at war with one another come together and compete again with dignity and fair play. And it just is a remarkable thing to say. I would say that for me, the most inspiring moment was at the end of the 68 marathon, a man John Akura, who said he came to the games not to compete in the marathon. He'd gotten all busted up, and by the time he was wearing kind of bandages that were slipping off his knees, he said he came to finish it and to finish that. And I think that certainly brought me together with a man who I would never know from a country in Africa who said, yeah, I didn't come here to start the race, I came here to finish it. And having that symbolism, I think brought a lot of people in the world together to respect then I see kids all the time, but that one was the one for me.
Beautiful. Who else has one?
I'll just go really quick and try and stick with a wrestling example, because I wanted to make a point earlier about how the sport has been becoming more inclusive to women. The NCAA just in 2020 declared it an emerging sport, a women's sport for college wrestling. And to see that this opportunity has been offered now to both genders on the college level is awesome for us. So I think now it's becoming a lot more inclusive and a lot more opportunistic for people of both genders.
And I think I saw both boys and girls represented on the Trenton Youth Wrestling website, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So thank you for helping to populate those future college teams.
Youth wrestling, we're doing our best to make sure that it's offered to both, and we do have a good number of boys and girls participating.
Beautiful.
Nicole, I'll say that it's not fair that we have to follow an Olympic bronze medalist.
She was the quickest on the draw. You should have answered first.
She keeps bringing up the Olympic Village. What stories do we have that can compete with that? Right. I will say, like, for me, I think the very nature of sports is about how it brings people together. I mean, my best friends in the world, people I consider brothers, are from basketball almost exclusively. I met my wife because of traveling through basketball. She was a volleyball player, but I think that, and to use our team as a microcosm, I mean, we have, so many guys from so many places. We have a guy from Israel now. We had a guy from, his family's from Puerto Rico who graduated last year, and a guy from Poland who graduated last year, and a guy from China who's still on our team. And we have a kid who's a Mormon kid and did a 2-year mission. And to see all these guys come together. I mean, our seniors, it's a Mormon guy, a guy from the DMV, and a guy from Pittsburgh, and a manager on our team living together in West Philadelphia. I mean, I think that's one of the greatest things about sports, is that it brings all those different people together.
Clemson.
So I'm gonna steal from Anita and tell Olympic stories, and tie it to basketball at the end. But I have two, and
forgive me, because I'm looking at the clock. So if you can keep it to one, and then when we bring you back another time, we'll let you tell the second one. I hate doing this, but it really, because Lucas has to come in and close this out any minute.
One of my greatest joys was, as a professional, was covering the '92 Olympics in Barcelona. And that was the first Open Olympics. That was after the Soviet Union fell apart, and it was the first Olympic with more new countries, and that record keeps changing every time. But I mean, it was the beginning of a new era in the Olympic movement. And I covered it for El País, the largest paper in Spain. Mm-hmm. I wasn't working for the New York Times or the Daily News now. I was working for the hometown paper, which gave me access. So one of my jobs that summer '92, was to cover the Dream Team.
Oh, wow.
And I was in Portland for the Tournament of Americas. I was with them in Monte Carlo, watching all the rich Europeans go gaga over Charles Barkley, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson. And when they came together, there was a lot of resistance from the Olympic movement, because they were seen as mercenaries, as pros. And both inside the Olympic movement and outside. And back then, there was a cadre of Olympic editors and writers, people who showed up every 4 years, and they took over the sports pages for 3 months. So and made gymnastics, track and field, and swimming the priority. And so very few people really got the Dream Team back then. But that's one of the finest assembly of talent and players ever in any sport. And they came together in a moment. And even though they won easily, there was no competition. The fact that the Olympic movement allowed finally for sport to present the best athletes inspired so many across the world that it changed basketball. And you just got to look at NBA today. Luka Doncic. I mean, there's any number of international players, but it all goes back to 1992 was the Dream Team, with Larry, Magic, Charles, and Michael. I was in Barcelona in La Ramblas watching Charles Barkley 2 a.m, walking up and down, 300 people behind him.
And with that, we'll wrap it up there, because I think that puts a very clear image in our minds of what that must have been like for you to be present for that at an amazing moment in sports history worldwide. A lot of us remember that. And I would like to thank all of you for sharing your stories and your time and your insights with us tonight. I know for one, I could sit here and listen to all of you for hours. I personally have learned a lot from each of you tonight, and I hope that we'll have more opportunities to talk. But I thank you for coming back virtually again. Nat, you didn't have to go far. But for everyone else, for returning to Penn for tonight as proud Penn alumni, we really appreciate it. And I'd like to turn it over to Lucas, the chair of our wonderful week of events.
Thank you. That was amazing. I'm very upset that Clemson, you couldn't finish your story, because I'm a huge basketball historian guy, so I'd love to hear some primary source stories about the 92 Olympics. But that's okay. We'll have to do that another time. But yeah, thank you so much, Anita, Clemson, Coach Graham, Cannon. That was fantastic. Thank you for everyone that came tonight. We hope to see you again tomorrow for representation and identity in sports. That's the panel for tomorrow. So again, we really hope that you guys come back, tell your friends about it. If you enjoyed tonight, tell them to come tomorrow, tell them to come Thursday. But seriously, that was fantastic, and I hope you all enjoy your night. In the meantime, follow us on social media if you want to keep tracking this week. You can follow Social Equity and Community, the and book at Social Equity at Penn, and on Twitter at SEC Penn. You can also follow Penn Athletics, who will be posting a lot of the same content throughout the rest of the week, with Penn Athletics on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. So if you want to keep following the event, follow those pages. They'll be posting a lot of great content over the next few days. But again, that was fantastic. I was glued to the screen. So thank you guys so much for our amazing panelists, and thank you for everyone that came tonight, and enjoy the night.
Thank you.
The Quakers.
Our pleasure.
Thanks, Lucas.
Thank you guys.